The Dawnbringer Chronicles. A feast for the ages.
In the flesh gardens of the Grand Gourmand's lavish encampment, a grand soiree was in full swing. Sinuous figures gambolled through a field of silken tents, holding aloft platters of devilled elf hearts. Writhing figures impaled upon spiral minarets screamed in agony, their voices joining in terrible harmony. Yonder, a trio of duelists sliced each other to ribbons with needle-thin blades, while a gargant, clad in an ill-fitting toga, threw up, loudly and repeatedly, into a crystal fountain. Reclining atop his palanquin at the centre of the festivities, Glutos or Scullion gazed across the scene of deviance and sighed. He popped another fistful of candied bowl fruit into his mouth. Each of the spherical things was soaked in a mixture of sweet wine and blood, and stuffed with a single eyeball that popped in his mouth, releasing its gelid contents.
Tasteless mush,
Glutos spat, the words exiting his mouth along with a spray of half-chewed viscera. This elicited a series of eager expressions from his courtier. Whenever their master was bored, a display of wildly inventive sadism soon followed.
Not one of you has brought me a dish worthy of my palate,
he roared.
Only this banquet of blonde mediocrity, this pompous chow. I could find a more scrumptious mouthful than a midden pet.
A clear, cocky voice rang out. Perhaps mine own offering might tantalize you, Grand Gourmand. Oscullion leaned his massive bulk to the left, peering ill-temperedly through the crowd of nervous sycophants. Swaggering forth came a strutting peacock of a lord, with a bare and oiled chest and an ornate half-helm that was wrapped around his jaw and the back of his skull, ending in a foot-long blade. A cruel-looking sabre was stowed upon the newcomer's hip, and in one hand he clutched a crystal decanter filled with a liquid as red as rubies. Glutos's bulbous nose twitched as a silver of pure sensation found its way into his nostrils, an intoxicating waft of simmering madness, almost powerful enough to blur his vision. He felt his mirror staff shiver as the demon contained within stirred from its slumber. Something new at last. Lothshar's sibilant voice slithered into the gourmand's mind. Sugar sweet and dripping with delicious decadence. We must have it, dearest one.
Zythancticos, is it not?
Glutos drawled, leaning forward to peer at the newcomer. Lord Zythancticos, the man corrected, not even bothering to hide the edge of anger in his voice. Glutos smirked. This fellow had devoted himself to the altar of arrogance. Even if Zythancticos knew well that Slaanesh's Grand Gourmand could have him boiled alive for such a lack of respect, the man could simply not contemplate showing deference to another. Not that the title of Lord of Hubris was a meagre one. Zythancticos was a name Glutos dimly recalled, one with an impressive history of bloodshed and debasement behind it. Yes, he might have even seen the braggadocious rogue Jewel once or twice. And that smell, that tantalizing, sickly sweet aroma. King's blood, cried Zythancticos, brandishing the decanter. This fabled liquor, rumoured to possess a taste that can incite a person to the most diabolical excesses. He presented the bottle to Oscullion. My gift to you, O taster of the sweetest sins. Or Scullion wiped away a splot of jelly from the corner of his mouth and snapped his fingers. His diminutive masked sommelier scampered off to the side of the gormand's palanquin and snatched the bottle from Lord Zythancticos, placing it in the master's hands. The Grand Gourmand raised the bottle to his lips and allowed a trickle of the stuff to settle on his tongue. He swished the mouthful around, and his eyes glazed over as an electric rush of tantalizing insanity coursed through him, a shiver of pure, delicious wrongness that filled his mind with flashes of bizarre imagery. For a moment he saw his court not as the tattooed, pierced, and flesh-warped hedonists that they were, but luminous courtiers, bedecked in gem-studded robes, kneeling before him in feudal supplication. The nearest figure rose, proffering a golden goblet, the contents of which glittered like starlight. Glutos reached down, grasped the man's shoulder gratefully, and bade him rise as he accepted the sacred offering. Then his surroundings bled away, like paint from an artist's palette left in the rain. Once more Glutos found himself in his palanquin, surrounded by wide-eyed courtiers. His hands were wrapped around the throat of his food taster, who was gurgling and turning a violent shade of puce as his eyes bulged out of their sockets. The Grand Gourmand studied the choking wretch for a moment, then released his grip. The taster flopped like a landed fish, whimpering and clutching his bruised throat. Glutos smacked his lips and shuddered with pleasure. He had consumed all manner of delicacies in his time, but never had he experienced such a strange sensation. Mothjar's excitement was almost painful in its intensity. How unutterably delicious! How sinfully sumptuous! Had Glutos not been Slanesh's foremost Epicurean, mind and body alike hardened against the most insidious intoxicants in existence, he suspected he might not have been able to drag himself back to lucidity. How would one with less redoubtable constitution fare?
Tell me, have you more of this delightful ambrosia?
The gourmand asked. Zythancticos' smile revealed teeth filed to needle points. Much more, Grand Gourmand.
Wonderful,
giggled Scullion.
It would be very selfish of me not to share, don't you think?
Glutus's travelling feast hall were quick to draw the attention of ogre kind whenever it wound its way through the territories. The ravening gluttons often proved a menace, for their bottomless appetite was often spiked by the sensuous aromas drifting from the gourmand's campfire spits. Many ogres had ended up on those very spits themselves, and always provided a most bountiful feast. Yet there were always those amongst the gulping god's followers who possessed a touch more restraint, and even a certain acumen when it came to deal-making, which never failed to amuse Glutos. Must we converse with these low creatures? Sneered Zythancticos, given the honour of joining the Grand Gourmand upon his palanquin.
Rogue Stoneguts is a most forward-thinking ogre,
chided Glutos.
His warriors have trailed behind my roving bacchanal for many seasons, hoovering up our leftovers. In exchange for a wagon full of sweetmeats every now and then, he kills whatever I ask him to.
Volk was waiting as the hedonite entourage approached in his ogre war camp. The tyrant was enormous, like all of his kind, a great slab of fat and muscle enrobed in rhinox hide, his swollen belly protected by a plated belt of metal fashioned in the image of a gnashing maw. Glutos saw the tyrant's pickish eyes boil with eager hunger.
Boss,
nodded the ogre.
Got some blade work for me? Salutations, mighty Lord Stoneguts,
said the Grand Gourmand, waving his hand theatrically.
May we join you? I bring many delicacies for your consumption.
He snapped his fingers, and chained sensates dragged forth a number of barrels stuffed with candied elf hearts, and a cart piled with lightly charred human remains. Volg's ogres started forwards, but the Grand Gourmand cleared his throat.
"One more thing,"
he said.
"An extra reward for your service these past seasons."
He produced the bottle of king's blood, and his servants brought forward cases of the stuff. Xanthancticos had a face like spoiled fruit, clearly not best pleased that his hard-earned loot was being doled out to a bunch of common barbarians. Volg himself seemed similarly disappointed.
"Not much for one,"
he grumbled, grabbing a bottle from the nearest case and downing its contents in one gulp, then reaching for another. 4 more met the same fate, with the only result being an enthusiastic belch. Xanthancticos and Glutos shared a quizzical glance. More ogres lumbered over, stuffing their ugly faces with fistfuls of food, washing it down with king's blood. It took a few moments for the fun to begin. One of the gut-plated brutes began to stagger, eyes glassy and wide, darting about as if searching for some invisible threat. The other ogres hollered and guffawed at him. A red-bearded iron gut with a face stained by wine and flecks of meat grabbed the wild-eyed ogre by the shoulder.
"Come and handle a bit of booze,"
he chortled. The glassy-eyed ogre responded by jamming his thumbs into his fellow's eyes. The wounded ogre howled, drew a foot-long blade from his belt, and stuck it between his attacker's ribs, and both went down in a bloody heap. Here we go. The sudden burst of violence was like a signal beacon flaring to life. In the blink of an eye, bedlam took charge. Ogres slapped and tore at each other, like those who had drunk too deeply from the cursed amphora, wearing the same strange expression of glazed-over confusion as the first victim had displayed. Some were singing off-key, others babbling a stream of nonsense as they hacked and clawed at their comrades. Glutos amused himself by pointing his mirror staff at one creature, allowing Lothshar to wrap its sorcerous tendrils around the fool's mind. With a dreamy expression on its face, the ogre began to eat its own fingers. "Oh, I am having such fun." Volg Stoneguts had another ogre by the back of the neck, and was slamming what was left of the poor wretch's face into the ground over and over again. He was smiling as he did it, but it was not the cruel smile of a killer, but the dreamy expression of idiocy that made him look disturbingly childlike, despite the gore splattered all over him. The tyrant's gaze drifted towards Glutos's palanquin. He had dropped his opponent's corpse, and rose to his feet, jabbing a meaty finger at the Grand Gourmand. Glutos studied the ogre thoughtfully, as Volg staggered closer, holding aloft a massive broad-bladed cleaver stained with fresh blood.
"Begone, foul creature," the ogre cried. "Thou art not welcome here."
This odd, archaic phrasing was most out of character. Volg charged, battering aside those ogres, drunkenly stumbling in his way. Glutos watched with interest as the huge creature drew nearer, wondering what exactly the brute was picturing in that slob-like head of his. Was it a similar scene to the one that had flashed through his own mind? Volg was only a few paces away when Lord Xanthancticos slid from the palanquin, landing deftly between the ogre and spinning to slice his dueling blade across the creature's throat. Blood spurted in a broad arc, and Volg Stoneguts tumbled with his neck yawning, gurgling his lost words into the dirt. Xanthancticos wiped his blade on the dying ogre's flank, a perfect look of disdain on his face. Glutos Oscolion offered the Lord of Hubris a polite tapping of applause. Then he licked his lips and leaned in close for a conspiratorial whisper.
"How much of this king's blood can you get me, Lord Xanthancticos?" he said. "I seem to have developed quite a taste for it."